So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session on digital developments and solutions. We have two presentations only today instead of three, because one of the presenters could not participate, unfortunately. But we do have lots of presenters. So I'm just gonna introduce everyone now. So the first presentation is going to be on digital bytes, lessons from harnessing these digital solutions during COVID-19 from Benjamin Harguth. Hopefully I've pronounced that right. Ben is Cardno International Development Senior Strategy and Business Innovation Lead, and in his role, Ben works with a diverse global team to leverage successes, lessons, and learnings across projects and donors to capitalize on innovative solutions for development challenges. Ben has led the development of Cardno's strategy, digital solutions for development to leverage the use of technology in aid programming. He's currently based in Kigali, Rwanda, and he holds a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Wisconsin and a Master of Public Policy from Central European University. I'm also going to introduce the presenter for the second paper presentation on how not-for-profit organizations are approaching the post-COVID work environment. We have Bruce Hargrave and Andrew McLean from Osky. Bruce is a seasoned solutions-driven business analyst with over 30 years of experience leading cross-functional teams in the development, documentation, and delivery of process innovations for the attainment of business goals. He seeks opportunities to transform any business practices into fresh, cost-effective solutions leading to more efficient operations. Andrew is a tenacious executive and team builder with a strong customer service focus and superb interpersonal and communication skills that contribute to a friendly and efficient working environment for senior management, peers, customers, stakeholders, and key decision makers. On the same paper presentations, we have Simon Terrell from Live Tiles. Simon is the Chief Product Officer for the fast-growing publicly listed global software company Live Tiles. He's based in Hobart. He's responsible for defining and implementing the strategy for Live Tiles' global team and products in order to keep it at the forefront of its target markets. He also co-teaches a vocational course in design thinking and creative problem solving and regularly runs professional development sessions with education bodies. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ben for his presentation. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone see my screen by chance? Excellent, great. Thanks everyone for joining today, and thanks to the organizers for the conference for having this session. I'm really happy and excited to share some of the insights on the impact of digital solutions and technology use during COVID-19. I think all of us are still very much in the midst of it. As I speak, I am currently in the third lockdown starting today in Kigali, Rwanda. So I know that this is definitely still something that we are working through. I think the pandemic, we're about 18 months since the onset of the global pandemic. So it allows us some time to reflect on the lessons, both positive and negative, in adapting and adopting digital solutions during these times of crisis. Technology and digital have provided some normalcy in our lives during this time. It's kept us socially connected. It's helped us be informed. It's provided the education platform for our children for online learning. Governments are using it to communicate very critical messages and to do analytics on health indicators to make decisions. Businesses and private sector and consumers are embracing e-commerce and digital solutions to help maintain the flow of goods and services. And so what I wanted to do today was just draw on a few case studies in the Asia Pacific region around programs that Cardno has been implementing in this area and where we've utilized digital solutions in the implementation of international development programs and how we can apply some of the lessons to scale and adapt for future use. So before we get into sort of those examples, I kind of wanted to look at sort of this trajectory or this model, this bell curve that's been around since the early 1960s around digital adoption and the digital life cycle. This can be looked at holistically across all digital adoption. It could be looked at for individual instances on applications and platforms. But what it shows is, the very latent beginning of what takes to adopt digital technology, and how you sort of create that momentum before there is a tipping point where it becomes much more commonplace and much more practical and mature for adoption across greater populations and demographics. And so you see sort of this median, this tipping point. And what really happens is that there is some sort of catalyst that creates it going from a very low uptake to a much more ingrained uptake of digital technology over the course of the life cycle. And I really believe that COVID-19 will have proven to be one of these catalysts for different technologies and platforms to become much more mainstream, but also as a catalyst in a number of countries that have been much more latent in the use of digital technology and in growing and scaling in the future. So to give you a brief overview of what is happening in the Asia Pacific region around digital technology, many of the Pacific Island countries and least developed states are still lagging behind global averages for digital adoption. The first graph that I've put up on the screen shows the percentage of individuals that are using internet in the Asia Pacific. This could be through mobile broadband, or it could be through fixed broadband. And you can see the world average at the first bar, and then the regional average on the second green bar. And in a lot of instances, in Southeast Asia and in a few Pacific Island countries such as Fiji, they're right on par with the world average and the regional average on the utilization of digital uptake in internet. And I think this is a good proxy indicator of showing how digital has been adopted and adapted in the region. But what you'll see towards the bottom of the graph is there are still a number of small island states that are very much on the latent and nascent usage of internet in the region. I think that's very indicative of digital technology as a whole in the region. I think the good news is, if you look at the second graph on the slide, is that this shows sort of the utilization of digital products and services over the past few years. And you'll see this exponential growth, of course, between 2019 and 2020, when we all sort of turned to different digital platforms and e-commerce solutions in order to maintain this normalcy during the pandemic. So while there has been a digital lag in the region, I think what it shows is the fact that there has been some sort of catalyst that has been happening over the past year in promoting some of these digital solutions. So I wanted to go into two case studies to look at how digital has been adopted in the Asia Pacific. And the first one is in Papua New Guinea. Cardno implements a program that's funded by the Australian government called Justice Services and Stability for Development, or the JSS4D program. And this program is working in the justice sector around gender-based violence and community safety. And one of the activities and ongoing essential services that is being provided in PNG is the One Talk telephone counseling hotline that helps support survivors of GBV in Papua New Guinea. And this is a counseling service that provides access to medical and psychological care and legal support and emergency protection. And what we wanted to do was ensure that those services were online and continued during the pandemic. And so as you can see on the bar graph, there were quite a substantial increase in instances of GBV during the state of emergency and during the pandemic in Papua New Guinea. And One Talk actually said that over the course of that initial months, there were 3 to 4 times the amount of instances of GBV that were being reported. And why gender-based violence was happening, of course, is tensions around lockdown and being financial burdens and tensions and that sort of thing. So it would, of course, sort of naturally create instances or sort of GBV becoming much more prevalent than it had been before. So in order to continue those services and make sure that people understood that they could still use the One Talk counseling hotline, we turned to providing messages. Historically, we had looked at traditional media models that would be print media and radio and community engagement. Of course, when you're in lockdown and state of emergency, community engagement wasn't really effective in being able to go out and present this message. So how did we reach the wider population to show that One Talk was still online and that they could use the services? And what we did is look at how to reach the demographics in Papua New Guinea. And just as a background, PNG has about 11% that has access to broadband or internet, including mobile and fixed. So only 11% of the population, which is the lowest in the world, but it has about a 50% subscription rate for mobile cellular services, so having cell phone access and stuff. So we knew that we could use basic mobile technology to reach half the population of PNG. And so what we did is develop strategic communications with mobile network providers, the police, and One Talk to send blast SMS messages out on a regular basis to those populations en masse in Papua New Guinea. And in order to kind of determine, the effectiveness of this, we also continued on with radio programming and traditional print media. And what One Talk did was, in order to understand the effectiveness of sending out these blast SMS and multi-modes of communication, they asked those that were calling in for the GBV services what prompted their call. And you can see by the pie graph, over 84% of the callers that were calling in indicated that they were calling because of that SMS blast message. So a very significant amount of people were being reached by that digital solution, that fairly basic low-tech solution on SMS messages. And the remaining was much more on that traditional media. So what can we learn from this? I think the use of technology has had a significant impact on the support services in PNG. Using simple and concise messaging in this low-tech solution and platform is very effective and quite inclusive, actually. And it can be readily applied to other campaigns and advocacies as needed. If any of you have looked and seen any of the recent studies that happened in in the past couple of months, you'll see that there's been a lot of mis and disinformation campaigns that have been happening online around COVID-19 and the vaccine, a lot of falsehoods and such. One estimate said that 62% of Facebook posts in the Pacific region were mis or disinformation. So a very significant amount that's being reached. But what we can learn from that is, because of the rather small percentage of individuals and demographics that have access to social media platforms and the internet, if we want to reach wider populations and demographics, it's very easy to do some of this more low-tech solutions like SMS blast. Of course, you can still counter with that social media platforms like Facebook, but using the SMS messaging is going to have a much wider impact and ability to reach wider segments of the population. And I think one of the key takeaways from this too is just using digital solutions that are effective given the local context and the ability for current digital adoption. So the second case study I wanted to look at was in Indonesia, and it's around the PKH program, which is a conditional cash transfer program that provides social benefits to the lowest income households in Indonesia. And it began in 2007. Since 2017, the PKH program has been doing a much more digitized electronic payment system to beneficiaries and recipients of the PKH program, which is fantastic. I think those of us that have been using fintech and mobile money platforms, we know it's a very quick, rapid, direct and cost-effective way to do cash transfers to access funds. And this became especially prevalent in Indonesia with COVID-19, where the government of Indonesia allocated about 13.9 billion to the social safety net program. Now, Indonesia itself is fairly well advanced in terms of cellular subscriptions. They have about 81% of the households have internet, have mobile subscriptions, and about 73% of the households have internet connectivity. So a very significant portion of the population. So the reach is quite a bit greater than it would have been in Papua New Guinea. I think when you take that into consideration, though, there's still about 20 to 25% of the population that do not have access to some of these digital platforms and solutions. And if you look at the PKH program where you're targeting the most vulnerable beneficiaries, those are probably going to be in the demographic that don't have access to those solutions. In addition to that, the fintech technology that's used in Indonesia is fairly robust, but it's really concentrated in the urban and suburban areas. So only 23% of the fintech companies have reached beyond Java, and none of them participate in the PKH program. So it's still very much in these really remote parts of the country. It's still very much a cash is king society. And even if individuals have access to mobile money or fintech transactions, et cetera, there's no guarantee that the shops and the services being provided are going to have it as well. So cash has become a very predominant basis for transactions, especially in really rural and remote areas. And to highlight this aspect of it, we did a study on one of our programs that's funded by DFAT called Makota around last mile access and how that has been impacted in the pandemic. So this program looked at villages that were beneficiaries of the PKH program in the Papua province, which is one of the most remote provinces in Indonesia. And even under the best of times, those recipients would have to go and collect cash at cash points for their payments into the program. And because they're so remote, this included multi-day treks. It could be through conflict-affected zones. It could be by boat. This is even under the best of times. And so, especially under COVID-19, the ability to have to travel to collect the benefits of this program became even harder. And if public transportation existed, which there's no guarantee there was, during a global pandemic, it's putting these vulnerable populations at even greater risk of having to go and collect this and take that transportation if they could, even during lockdown. So it just really highlights and indicates the importance of having inclusive financial technology that can be utilized for these as wide a population as possible. I think one of the really interesting aspects of this, and this was even before COVID on this program, is they had experimented with using helicopters to fly to these remote villages, and the cost of doing that was greater than the cost of the recipients. So that pilot program stopped after that realization happened, but it just really goes to show the effectiveness of using a digital solution in promoting cost-effective and inclusive aspects into international development programs. But there still is this aspect of the last mile access that needs to be overcome. So both the Makota program that we implement and the Australia-Indonesia Partnership for Economic Development program, both funded by DFAT, is working with the government and private sector counterparts to sort of advocate for reforms that promote digital financial inclusion. This includes policy reform and investing in cost-effective connectivity solutions and infrastructure. The intended objective, of course, is to facilitate the sort of enabling environment that improves technology's access and function and integration so that it is much more inclusive across wider demographics. So what can we take away from these two case studies and the brief conversation that we've had? I think that the most important thing is the pandemic has highlighted the need that we need to continuously innovate and improve connectivity and access to ensure those that are most vulnerable and hardest to reach are benefiting from technology improvements. And especially in the Pacific area and remote regions, this last mile access is still very much on the forefront of some of those overarching challenges. Still, I think technology very much is an enabling force that has rapidly evolved and scaled over the past 2 decades, but especially in the past 18 months. And even in countries where we have latent use and access and demographics that have very nascent application, even basic digital solutions provide systems and platforms to create some degree of service provision and social protection and communication. So even in its basic use, it can really move the needle in terms of becoming much more ingrained in our international development approach. So as the world is recovering from COVID-19, we really hope that this proves to be a catalyst that jumpstarts this sort of digital revolution in many of the emerging contexts and countries where it's much more latent. And at the very least, I think it provides some very critical lessons and considerations on how we address digital inclusion and further advancement and scalability of digital solutions in international development. Thanks.
Thanks, Ben. That was a very interesting presentation. So before we move on to the next presentation, I just wanted to remind everyone here that we're going to have a Q&A session at the end. And please post your questions in the Q&A chat that you can see at the bottom of your screen, and I will read out those questions to you during the session. So over to Bruce, Andrew, and Simon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Ben, for a great presentation. Very good. So hi, everyone. My name's Andrew. I'm the Senior Account Manager here at Osky. We're excited to be sponsoring the 2021 RDI conference and bring along our partner, LiveTiles. What would it have been like trying to work remotely without any connectivity solutions over the last year or so? How would we have kept working and contributing? What would the world have been like if there was no Zoom or Skype? Even though we had these tools, what of the people that can't just work from home, like your volunteers and employees that are on the front line? How do you communicate and engage with them and get their attention? So along with our partner LiveTiles, we'll be looking at ways through these issues. And at this point, I would like to introduce Simon Tyrrell from LiveTiles to take over. Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, Andrew. Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me. A thumbs up. All good. Excellent. So I'll just get straight into it and share the presentation. So let me know when you are all able to see that. All good?
Got it. Thanks,
excellent.
Man.
So look, we'll probably a slightly different tack on this topic of technology and disruption and the impact it's had on the world, particularly over the past 18 months. And LiveTiles is very much based in the employee experience world. We work with customers all around the world about how do they deliver better experiences to their employees. But interestingly, we've seen all the stuff that we traditionally do evolving very, very quickly over the last 12 to 18 months into not-for-profit sector, volunteer-based organisations, and also membership-based organisations. And the reason for that is pretty much everybody's being digitised. It's not just the big companies with the big IT budgets that have been forced to digitise just about everyone in their organisation. And so what I thought I'd do is share with you some of the trends we're seeing from our 1,200 odd customers that, as I mentioned, they range from the US Marines through to some of the biggest retail brands in the world, but also down to small not-for-profits, the whole gamut of, I guess, types of organizations and types of industries. And to be honest, everyone likes to think they're different. They all have very similar challenges, but there are some unique challenges in the not-for-profit space, but also industries such as retail, where you're predominantly, the majority of your workforce are shift-based workers, casualized workforce, working all over the place. And all of the benefits of this digitization may not actually be what you think they are of that workforce. So we thought it'd be a very useful topic to talk to this audience about. So I'm Simon. I'm the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer for LiveTiles. I'm not going to go into who we are. You can find us online. But as I mentioned, we build technology solutions and software that are used by organizations to try and improve this thing called employee experience. Now, it's a very trendy word. Now you're going to hear a lot about it over the next 1 to 2 years. Everybody does it now. Even service desk systems are now employee experience platforms. The reason for that is just the huge push for a better digital experience, in particular, better experience overall, that has really come to the fore since COVID hit globally. So a little bit of setting the scene here. As I mentioned, the last 18 months, in fact, it was the 12 months of 2020 that we saw the fastest digitization of the world that we have in history. Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, I think was quoted at the time about midway through 2020 that Microsoft had seen more digitization and use of technology in 3 to 4 months than they would normally see in, I think it was 3 to 5 years. We saw that in our customers. I can think of a health organisation, 16,000 people, everything from hospitals, clinical staff to ambulances, volunteers, all sorts of things. And they had a 3-year program of work where they were going to finally move their email to the cloud online. And in less than 2 weeks, they rolled out Microsoft Teams as a collaboration and communication solution to every single person. So every plan that organizations had, every program of work, every budget just got thrown out the window and people without a choice. That then led to this, how do we keep engaged? And lockdowns have absolutely, and Ben, sorry to hear you're in your 3rd lockdown there. My thoughts go out to anybody in the various parts of Australia right now. I'm in Hobart, so safest place in the world right now, I think, because we're so isolated from everyone. But this thing about how do we engage moved from a nice to do. Before 2020, sure, there were KPIs. Maybe a few executives had this, and yes, engagement surveys would be run once a year, but it became a must do. And it became a must do because we had to get a better experience. We had to keep people engaged. We were seeing the impact of the pandemic on mental health and the various aspects of that, on loneliness, which exploded last year. And so organizations basically had a mandated responsibility to start thinking more deeply and more seriously about this. As I mentioned, that has led in turn to this explosion, this thing called the employee experience. And we're also seeing that, as I mentioned, back into the membership experience. So it's quite interesting right now how many customers we're working with where, yes, they're dealing with their own workforce. So I think about Ben at Cardno, for example, that type of organization where there might be 4,000 employees type thing around the world, but then there might be another 10,000 people that organization relies upon and is part of its business model, if you want to call it that. And organizations are really looking to step up the game in that, because it's quite scary how many organizations don't know anything and cannot communicate in any sort of form that's scalable to members and volunteers. And that obviously also got impacted last year. So a lot of good stuff's happened. However, it's not all rosy. And this might be a little bit of a shock to some of you coming from a tech guy, but it isn't all rosy. Zoom fatigue, we're on Zoom, so let's call it go-to-meeting fatigue, is a real thing. And there's a study then done by Stanford earlier this year. There's been studies coming out all around the world around what is actually happening with all these online meetings, particularly video meetings, and the cognitive load, the stress it causes, anxiety in people it's causing, and people are starting to switch off from them. Always on work, I think it's 30 to 40% increase in average hours per week is happening in the Western developed world on average. Heaps of new applications, systems, platforms, tools being thrown into the mix. I don't know about you all, but I regularly will be using 3-4 different meeting systems in one day and jumping in and out of them and remembering how to use them. And that's not including all the other sorts of things being thrown at people. And the really important point I want to focus on towards the end of this quick presentation is most of the narrative right now, if you look at the media, if you look at research articles, is around office workers. This idea of the new hybrid work, the work-life balance, the blending of work and life, the work from anywhere, the create your own hours models are all based on white-collar jobs, based on jobs like mine, where I can choose whether I go to the office today or not. I can choose, okay, I'm going to take a bit of time off now and I'm going to catch up later. That does not apply to what is classically referred to as the front line. And I think for many people on this session today, a lot of the people you rely on, you have in your organizations, I would imagine fit that category. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. So what is employee experience? Go online to your favorite search engine. You will find a whole bunch of definitions on this. I'm yet to find one I really like, but one of the ones I've sort of does resonate a little bit with me is this one from McKinsey. And it's this idea, it's about how an organization, says company, but it could of course be an organization, not-for-profit, etc. And they're people working together, and it's about personalization. It's about authentic experience. It's not about a one-size-fits-all. And the goal of it is to tap into the passion and purpose of your people. And by doing that, all the research will show us you will get better individual, better team, and better performance for your organization. That is without doubt. However, it's often been a nice thing to talk about and not readily actually achieved. And so this is going to be one of the biggest things happening with the technology industry and with organizations over the next 5 to 10 years. We've spent the last decade doing this for what's called customer experience. And a lot of the lessons learned out of that are starting to flow into how organizations think about their own internal customer base, their people. So what are some of the big trends we're seeing? And I think I've picked out 3 of about 10 that I think really should resonate with your organization. So the first one is, how do we communicate? I can think of a number of our customers that pre-COVID were still communicating to their frontline workforce with printed out staff newsletters put into staff rooms. We heard from Ben before about the fact that the access to digital technology means you have to think differently about how you engage people in certain parts of the world. And I believe that this reimagination and rethinking about how we communicate is actually going across the board. And that's because we've been really, really bad at it. And it was very badly exposed last year. So 13% of employees, this is from a Gallup poll last year, strongly agree that their leadership communicates effectively with them. 13% of people. In late 2020, Gallup also did a survey within the US where 36% of employees considered themselves actually engaged at work, which means almost 2/3 of workers in the United States do not feel engaged in their workplace. And we know from all of the data and research, which I haven't put into these slides in the interest of time, what that means in terms of retention, cost of staff turnover, productivity, performance, well-being in the workplace. We know all of the numbers. If you're not engaged, they are very, very negative impacts to both the individual, the team that individual's in, and the organization that individual's in. So if you think about that, 13% of people feel like they're well communicated to by their leadership, 36% of US, and this number is roughly the same in other parts of the world as well, actually think they're engaged. We have a big problem. We are clearly not communicating well, and we are not engaging well in most organizations. And so what are the trends out of the last 12 to 18 months that we're seeing? We are definitely seeing a move to less formal, more authentic communications. I'm not sure if you could put up your hand and say that your own organizations are doing this, but if you think about your experience, I mean, even Valentina, I'm looking at you now, you're sitting back in an office, you're not really worried about it anymore. You're not trying to look too overproduced. We've had the CEOs of some of the biggest companies in the world suddenly realize that they're people and that they have families. And yes, their kids got to run in naked behind the video while they're on a big board meeting call, etc. We've had politicians experience the same thing. Really last year humanized a lot of the communications that people were involved in. And we're seeing a big trend in maintaining that in all sorts of ways. The use of audio, there's going to be an explosion of startups doing little video vignette type applications, etc. But this idea of being more authentic to who you are, being less formal, less staged, and therefore being more real and resonating better. We're seeing a huge increase in the use of audio, what's called short form audio, very much driven by the podcasting sort of movement. You've seen Facebook release recently their own version of this. You'll see Twitter in the not too distant future, we believe, release something like this. Why? We're all sick of video. And that is that Zoom fatigue. But we also know that audio, and once again, a bunch of research has been done over many years on this, the ability to build empathy is greater with audio than video because we are not as distracted on processing what we see. We don't get distracted by what Andrew's wearing or where he might be sitting. We are more tuned in, and that's why podcasting is one of the fastest growing and most engaged with content mediums online. We're seeing a lot of video, and you've probably got this in your own organizations, whether it's internal, external people. But how do we unlock that so we don't just have these big, dumb, recorded blobs of stuff of which there's all this knowledge, all this information, all this IP? How do we unlock that? So you're starting to see more solutions start to untap that and make it searchable, just like any other form of content. New ways to run internal events. We're seeing big trends on that. How do you do this when everyone is COVID normal, if you want to call that? What can we do that we've learned from this big push to events like this, where it's all virtual? Do we go back to the physical, or is it more of a hybrid? So I think you can expect to see a bunch of things running through there. And also the big one, which I'll talk about next, is meeting people where they are. We have so many tools, so much distraction, that trying to win the battle for attention and pull you back to my thing is going to be really, really hard to do. And really that talks about what can we learn from what we call digital omnichannel marketing. I mentioned earlier that for the past decade or so, there's been this massive push around customer experience and how we use the digitization of the customer commerce model. How do we engage better? How do we market better? How do we get people to buy what we want? How do we know what they want? All of those things have a huge amount of effort's gone into nearly every organization in the world. And a lot of lessons were learned from that. So you can really expect to see a lot of that language, a lot of that thinking start to come in into the internal perspective. And we refer to that as really trying to think about the moments that matter. And I think this is critical, as I'll mention at the end, around the frontline workforce. And reason this is important is really with all this digitization across the world, across all types of workers, this is the type of day we've got. And I'd be surprised if anyone on this session right now hasn't had a day like this, where basically you just keep getting pinged and pinged and pinged and pinged with things vying for your attention. Everything is equally important. Please click me, to the point where for my own sanity, often it's when I've ignored every notification of the day, I feel like I've had the most productive day possible. Right now, the problem with that is there could be some really important things that I've just decided to miss, or I've missed just because I've had too many. And you think about on a lot of the digitization that's happened with using personal devices for frontline workers, there's all the stuff you're sending from as an organization. Then there's all the stuff they got on their own device for their own personal life, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, whatever. All of those are meshed together. And that means if you're trying to communicate or engage with your workforce, with your volunteer base, with your membership, you are in a battle for their attention. And so moments that matter is about really trying to think about what are the moments throughout the day, week, or year that are meaningful to your employees, to your members, to your volunteers. How can we focus on those moments so we're not just bombarding everyone and causing distraction and interaction? And really importantly, a really big shift you're going to see is how can we be actionable within the places people are? And I think Ben spoke to a little bit about this, about, if SMS is the best way to get to someone, well, let's make it so that SMS can actually achieve something rather than just be a notification tool, etc. If email is the most accessible medium to get it in, well, let's change the way email is used. And once again, let's make it actionable so I can get asked to do something, participate, and I can do it and it goes away, rather than being told, I'll click here and I jump out. And that's because of this stat, which I find one of the scariest statistics I've ever come across. And this is by Deloitte. The average employee globally switches between 35 job critical applications more than 1,100 times per day. Now, there is a whole bunch of different theories on the cognitive load that causes. The ones I subscribe to are at somewhere between 10 to 15 minutes when you get interrupted before you're cognitively back to the focus you were doing or the task at hand. Let's just assume it's only a minute. 1,100 minutes a day of distraction, interruption. What that does to how people stress, their anxiety, not to mention their productivity. And this is actually on the lower side of some of the stats around what's going on. And if you think about what's happened with that rapid digitization, there is even more tools vying for people's attention. This is not sustainable, and something's going to have to change. And I think critically for your type of organizations, not only for you as an employee within these organizations, but when you're thinking about your external audience as well, this is going on for them as well. Okay, so how do we really stop trying to bombard everyone? And that raises this question, is there still a front door? In our world, in employee experience, there's all this thing about, we're going to drive people to our intranet, to our portal, to our app, to our this, to our that. In the external world, it might be, we're going to drive our members or our volunteers to a membership portal or our volunteer portal. And that's the front door to our organization. Really? 35 applications, 1,100 distractions a day, people on different levels of digital literacy, different types of applications they're using to get their tasks done. We don't think there is a front door. And we think you've got to shift your thinking to how do we do this, what's called omnichannel way of engaging with the people we need to engage with. And really, just quickly, it's about flipping the mindset from the old school is the system is the destination. I'm going to run a change and adoption program and I'm going to get Valentina to adopt my thing that I've just rolled out and spent a lot of money on. Flipping that to, doesn't matter what it is, we've got a bunch of them and it's probably going to change to new stuff. When new stuff comes along, let's think about how the user is the destination rather than the system. And that's a pretty big flip for how technology is often perceived, because just about every tech vendor in the world wants your attention and they want to trap you in their tool. Right? Because that's the way they're valued in terms of usage. And finally, the front line. I think you all know this from your types of organizations you are. And I think, Ben, you spoke very well to the digitization and the gaps around the world. But 70% of the global workforce do not sit at the desk. Okay. And yet the narrative is, hey, you can work from anywhere, work from your kitchen, etc. Well, that doesn't work for the nurse on the emergency floor of a hospital in Africa. Okay. They can't choose when they turn up to work. They can't choose to when they log on and all those things. So we need to bear this in mind. But they are, in many cases, connected for the first time ever. I mentioned earlier, so many of our customers, I think about retail, I think about health, construction, where so many of their workforce, whether casualized or full-time, are now actually truly connected to their organizations in a digital manner. And that was driven by that need for critical updates about the pandemic, about lockdowns, about the offices being shut, the offices opening, and how do we just keep business going when a lockdown happens. So it drove all of that, like that health example. And now we actually have an opportunity to do things that were prior to COVID too hard. They were too expensive. We'd never do that. They're casual workforce. We're not going to spend, $5 a month giving them the tool that we're giving everyone in the office. We saw it so often. That's been blown out of the water. So we now have this opportunity to engage these people. But is it fair to simply open the fire hose of noise to these people? I was speaking to someone the other day. In fact, I was doing this presentation in a different context a few weeks ago, and I had the head of technology for a veterinary organisation that has clinics all around New South Wales. And he came up to me at the end and just said, "Oh, thank you for raising this, because I can tell you, my vets and nurses do not care what we're sharing with them from company communications. They care about saving the animal that's on the operating theatre table." Right. And so just bombarding them with all those notifications I would argue, is not fair and is counterproductive to engagement. So we need to start thinking about when is the right time to engage. And you will see technology very quickly, I think, and I know we're working on this, start to evolve to, hey, I know I've sent Andrew I'm meant to be sending him this notification about something right now, but I can see in some way that he's already received 20 in the last 30 minutes. I'm not going to add to that. I'm going to hold it back, or I'm going to send it to him in a digest of stuff at the end of the day. Or you know what? I know Andrew is a retail worker in a store. I'm going to send it to his shift manager, who can inform him of this information. That's the sort of stuff you will start to see happening. And ask yourselves in your own organizations, have you actually sat back and thought about the differences in the working environment and the experience that you may have in an office or work from home versus what someone in your organization might have on the front line? And there is starting to be a trend where people are saying they're actually very different. They have different needs, different requirements, and therefore they might actually need different tools rather than the one size fits all. So So other trends going on, that's leading to dedicated apps where you can get it on any device. You can get it from the public app stores, but they're all secured, etc. You're moving away from VPN access and all that stuff to relying on app-based security on the devices, making it very accessible, very easy. That health organization I mentioned before, first time in history, a paramedic in the back of an ambulance is accessing the same information but in a different way to somebody in one of their office locations. Recognizing this difference between the frontline and HQ or office work. It's fairly nascent at the moment. There's only a few organizations that are actually talking about this, but expect that to happen. I really encourage in your own organizations, in your own sort of daily work, to think about that. When you blast out something and wondering why people aren't reading it, for example, is that because they're actually on the shift and actually busy? We're seeing organizations starting to try and improve that, reimagine how they communicate. And then when they've worked that out and they know they've got people and they've got some attention, starting to think about, okay, how can we provide a more integrated experience to stop all of that context switching? So if I've got your attention now about something, maybe I can deliver you something such as an approval or something you need to validate. I can get that to you in the same form. You can deal with it and it goes away, rather than forcing you to jump in and out of different things all the time. And the final one is this power of a digital profile. The digitization and use of technology ultimately leads to a digital footprint. So many organizations of frontline workforce knew nothing about their people. They don't necessarily have email addresses. So this digitization has meant we now start to have some information about people, and how can we start to empower that profile so we can be very targeted, very personalized, and very relevant to people, as opposed to that fire hose just blurting it all out to them. So what does it all mean? Key takeaways I'd like you to think about. More employees in the world are now digitally accessible than ever before. I think nobody would disagree with that. And that applies to both employees within organizations, volunteer employees, casualized workforce employees, freelancer employees, or volunteers, right? And membership bases. How do you take advantage of this without adding to the noise? Have you ever thought about it if you're in a position of communicating or engaging with these types of people? How can you go beyond basic communicating to actually achieve engagement? What could you do differently so it's not just a link to another Zoom meeting, given that Zoom fatigue is a very real thing in the world? And have you sat back and thought about what moments truly matter to our people, to my team, to the volunteer base I'm using in a particular part of the world, the members if I'm an association, what really matters to them? Because I can tell you it is not everything.
Thanks, Simon. Sorry, I'm going to have to stop here.
You're all done.
Thank you. Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. Thanks to the Osky and Lifetiles team. It was a great presentation. We already have a couple of questions actually for the team here. So although lots of new technology has been developed, there is a gap in digital literacy between different generations. Sorry, the screen moved. Industry and regions. I feel this gap is increasing. How can we introduce new technology without creating a gap or barrier in a team industry of the world?
Is that for me or Ben, or
who wants to take this?
I'll start if you want, Ben, and then you can correct me.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Look, from I guess I'll give the tech vendor view of the world. I think it's absolutely a real thing. And some of those examples I spoke to, such as the healthcare organization, a huge gap in that organization. That's a very wealthy Western jurisdiction, that organization, but you do have a very big age differential within that organization. And you also have, I'd argue, the technology gap between just the situation people are working in. For example, that ambulance officer cannot be on a screen their entire shift. So the way we think about this is too much tech, as I mentioned before, is built around this idea of I'm going to win the battle for your attention. You're going to learn how to use my thing and I'm going to capture you. Whether it's Slack, whether it's Snapchat, whether it's Facebook, they are all built on owning your attention. And that means that if that's the only way you're going to sort of try and engage, then you're forcing everybody you're trying to engage with to learn and adopt that piece of technology. Whereas we think that flipping it to no, we know we've got people out there, users, whatever you want to call them, we need to get to them. And so I might do something like publishing a big announcement. Let's make it really simple use case. And it gets to somebody via a text message. Maybe it's a multi-part text message because that's the best way to get to those people based on their circumstances. For others, it might be a highly engaging interactive email. And yes, for others, it might be an employee app on their phone that's rich and they can do all sorts of stuff with. That's where we think it needs to go. Otherwise, you're always going to be trying to get everyone up to the same level when it is not necessarily a level playing field and never will be. And the other issue with that is you change too much. New stuff comes along all the time, and then you have to redo it all. So that's, I guess, not sure if that answers the big question, but it's about trying to be across more channels and be more responsive to the user's circumstances.
Thanks. Ben, do you want to add something to that?
Sure, happy to, especially from the international development perspective and working in these emerging economies and countries and the least developed states. I think this digital divide is one of the utmost concerns when we're working in digital and technical solutions on development programs. And I think that there are a number of ways to sort of combat that. And it's sort of a multi-pronged approach. I think, Simon, as you were mentioning, having that sort of end user experience is definitely one of those things. So if we're looking at technology and development in particular instances, countries, local context and stuff, if you're developing a particular application or technology use, you want it fit for purpose and what people are going to be able to uptake in particular. So making sure that it's, somewhat intuitive so that if even at all levels are able to utilize that technology. I think the other key component to this is really utilizing education and incorporating digital skills and competencies into education. I think that's a lifelong learning process. I think it's developing it in primary and secondary education, especially in emerging contexts. But I think also from a workforce development perspective, I think some of the things that we've been seeing around fintech and e-commerce of making sure that workforce is coming up to skills on some of these emerging technologies. So it isn't just a one and done sort of situation. It's a lifelong process that we have to continue to evolve as digital evolves. And I think the third prong that we look at in international development is how you actually create that connectivity and access. If you look globally, cell phone coverage is actually quite expansive. There's only a very small segment of the world that is still not connected via cell phone that would have access to broadband or mobile technology, but it's the actual access, people being able to utilize that and having the ability to pay for data or to have a smartphone to access the internet or any number of these things that is actually preventing the access to the infrastructure. So I think we have to look at some of the root causes of that and, whether it's actual building of infrastructure or the tech development side of things, in some of these remote contexts and last mile access, it might not be commercially viable from a private sector perspective. So how can governments sort of come in and help offset that cost, develop public-private partnerships to develop some of that infrastructure or tech dev, so that becomes a bit more of a public good in various aspects of it, especially when you're looking at that last mile access to circumvent that digital divide.
Thanks. I think this is partly sort of answer the second question that we have here in terms of, for those who are new online, what are some of the consideration that are required for long-term online sustainability and ease of use? And I think we can connect this also with the next question that brings two things together. Would you have any recommendations for organizations that have offices and staff in a highly connected country, but also a really remote area with a lack of infrastructure for online connections? Now, the session is going to close literally at 4:15. So if you have like 3 minutes to provide an answer for this, that'd be great. Thanks. Simon, you're muted.
There we go. Someone had to do it. Really quick. I think one of the things I'd say on that last point is I think a building of empathy within the highly connected part of your organizations. And to be honest, I don't want to give them too much credit. Facebook do some interesting stuff around this for they're renowned for Friday switching off their head office in Silicon Valley to third world country internet speeds. And they do that so that their product designers can understand what it's like to use their products. with those sorts of things. So I'm not saying you go that far, but I think building empathy and understanding with these people you're trying. And there was a question I think here about do I send the email? Do I do this? Not assuming video meetings. I think it's a big one that's happened. How many times have you seen people try to join from bad connections, right? And it's not going to be good for them. They're going to feel like they're not able to participate. They're going to feel like they're missing out. So I think having that in the top of mind, and that's really an education process and a building of empathy. And quickly to those, how do you do sustainable digitization? Keep it simple. Keep it mixed. Use it for both fun and serious stuff. We just see too many organizations get into this model and they just keep doing it. And before they know it, their audience has disappeared on them. So, that'd be my tips.
Thanks. Ben.
Yeah, I think this has been one of the questions in talking to some of the government counterparts that we've been working with in emerging economies. During the onset of COVID-19, a lot of the multilateral donors and bilateral donors were actually paying for the licenses for some of these platforms that we've been using. And how does that become sustainable after that funding goes away? So I think it's one of those things as we're looking at sustainability, what makes the most sense? Open source software and utilizing some of these platforms that are accessible or free that don't have those costs. So it's a fit for purpose sort of situation depending on the access points. And I think to that point too of looking at remote places, you have to be cognizant of the bandwidth issues in countries that we're working in. So does audio make more sense or does video make more sense? And so you have to kind of do that evaluation of what works. I think one of the things that a lot of these countries and ministries have been talking about to help circumvent some of that bandwidth issue is around data localization. So, where are people going? How far back is the internet connection going? And so there's been a greater push, especially in some of these developing countries and really remote areas, to try and localize that data a little bit more so that it's a bit easier and circumvent some of that bandwidth issue in the remote locations.
Thanks, Ben. So yeah, just 1 minute to thank everyone. Thanks to all the speakers. Thank you to our tech facilitator, Corey. And thanks to everyone who has attended this really interesting and future-looking session. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.